love Before and After Science, but it was more in the same direction as Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy. It was interesting in that Another Green World and Discrete Music, which both came out in 1975, signified this very strong change in the way that Eno's sales were sort of blowing. But then you have Before and After Science, which is sort of more of a rock record. I think there are some really incredible, beautiful songs on Before and After Science. There are incredible, spastic, kind of rocking songs like King's Lead Hat. Then you have incredibly beautiful, soft, sort of hushed lullabies like Spider and I. Really, really beautiful songwriting on Before and After Science.
As had been done with the Bowie records, Eno divided the album between an up-tempo A-side and a downbeat, semi-ambient B.
On all those records that subdivide the Bowie records that he'd worked on before, the quieter stuff always comes second. I mean, that seems to be the hangover after the party, as it were, and that this record's no different to that. It's not the most cohesive record. It doesn't really read in the way that, say, Another Green World does, that lovely kind of processional trip that you take. It's much more isolated essays or vignettes almost, but there's some beautiful things on it, and again, it's that range. You know, it has it has a track that's co-authored by Rodelius, which takes us back to the cluster, rural idyll. There's King's Lead Hat, which is a jokey Talking Heads, Monkey track, and all stations in between.
Here we are, stuck by this river, you and I, underneath the sky that's ever falling down, 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 ever falling down.
Before and After Science, my two favourite tracks are on the B side of Before and After Science are By This River and Julie With. Those two songs are so static, they move so slowly. They're literally sound painting onto tape. You put them on, and by the end of them you're in a different place. You're brought into an environment. And they're incredible beauty. They're almost religious. I mean, there's something very sacred about that music. Eno has finally found a complete mastery of his own talent, his ability to sing, to construct sound, to play instruments, to make music. This is music now. This is no longer experiment. This is truly music. It's evolved into music.
On the second half of Before and After Science, I think you have much more interesting, successful songs like Julie With, By This River. They have these characters that we've never really seen in rock before. They're very kind of listless, they've got no willpower, they've got no drive, they're kind of marooned in some sense. And I think that was drawn to these passive, serene, slightly melancholy scenarios. Just because they were so different from rock music, and also probably because it suits his personality. He's not like a rock rebel. And with his music, he was really kind of rebelling against rebellion, the sort of ossified notions of rebellion exemplified by a band like the Rolling Stones, which he didn't like at all. And also, punk at that time was kind of the opposite of what he was looking for.
And as the music scene shifted around him, Eno's next act of rebellion would be to abolish song structures entirely in his own work. Although he would go on to produce more conventional albums by other artists, Before and After Science was Eno's last vocal album for 2 decades. With hindsight, the clues were there on the album's more downbeat, abstract side.
By the time of Before and After Science, I mean, you can hear on the second side, he is moving off into the ether where he has remained ever since. King's Lead Hat ends the first side, and then that second side, well, it's okay. He's definitely thinking about other things besides writing good songs.
If you look at the Beatles' most creative period, let's just say between Help, Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper, That's a 4-album sequence that has some consequence. Eno's sequence has a similar consequence, but he emerges on the other end, not as the Beatles did with the White Album, where they threw out all the experimental stuff and said, let's get back to basics. Eno emerges on the other end of his development and really goes into the ambient style. So this series of what in my book I call Eno's progressive rock albums, I see really as stripping away the elements of rock and roll one by one, until by those final tracks on Before and After Science, you are already in the ambient style.
The album's release marked a turning point in Eno's career. 1978 would see him moving to New York and forging new creative relationships with a younger generation of musicians. It would also see him further the concept of Obscure Records to a new series of releases that would draw him into collaboration with more experimental artists and spotlight his concept of ambient music. Yet his later achievements were only possible due to this first period of his career, when he had emerged from one of the most important rock acts of the era to establish himself as a truly unique figure in music. A fearless collaborator and sonic architect who produced his own form of pop, while at the same time bringing experimental music closer to the mainstream than it had ever been.
Brian Eno made this stuff sexy. He made it interesting, he made it fun, he made it fleshy and had life. Part of the problem with a lot of this kind of academic experimental music, is this very kind of stiff and uptight in a certain way. Meanwhile, like, Eno was making it not so very serious, but more rock and roll and more interesting for your average listener to tune into.
At the same time, the sheer level of activity during this first period of his career produced many of the seeds that were allowed to bloom later. For many, his early experiments, his collaborations, and his 4 vocal solo albums, released between 1973 and 1977, remain the most important works in his extensive canon.
It's only 5 years, but 5 years where this individual has made more music than 100 individuals in a lifetime, in 5 years. To start with Roxy Music and end with Before and After Science and Bowie, it's just, nothing could be better really for an artist. I mean, to end on a high, And then for the rest of his life now, he had established himself as a producer, as a composer, as a studio boffin, as a theorist. I mean, he was set for life.
Brian's creative life is incredibly accelerated in this mid-70s period. He's practically working on something every time he's awake, he's working on something. There was no one else like him in that sense. You don't really see the newspapers looking for the new Eno at any point, because he's a singularity. He's the art school, he's the particular kind of music, he's a kind of rock star, he's a kind of producer, he's a kind of artist, he's a kind of executive. He's all these things, and he's either a dilettante or a polymath, depending on which side you come from. Probably a mixture of both.